Hello and welcome everyone to Liquid New Hampshire. We have our first guest here today. This is Jon Kiper. He is an outsider candidate running in the gubernatorial election here in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
It's nice to meet you, Jon.
Thanks for having me on.
I was excited to see that one of your core issues that you were talking about was running on getting actual legislators paid in the state of New Hampshire.
Yeah, it's a big deal, and it's something that a lot of people haven't thought about until you put it in their face that we've got 400 legislators. Of those, 80% are rich or retired because they're only paid $100 a year, and New Hampshire's the only state in the country that does it that way. So, a big part of my campaign is just getting that message out there, getting people to think about this and the downstream effects of not paying the legislature in the fact that working class people just are not really being represented in Concord. And it's, in my mind, little coincidence that we lack housing when 95% of the legislature owns houses. Only about 5% rent, and in reality 30% of New Hampshire's residents rent houses. So I think it's really important that people think about this and start asking, if you're going to vote for someone for Senate or legislature or executive council or governor, ask them, hey, do you support paying the legislature? I mean, that's a conversation I really want to move along. That's kind of, I think, the most important aspect of my campaign in some ways, because a lot of the bills that are getting passed, I think if we had a paid legislature and younger people who, working class people, if they could afford to go up there, I think a lot of these bills wouldn't have a chance. I also think the Free State Project, which if you didn't know is a libertarian organization that's trying to basically dismantle the government infrastructure in New Hampshire, I think they would not be able to do what they're doing if it was not for the fact the legislature's not paid. I think that's really important for people to realize.
Yeah, I think probably the majority of people in New Hampshire definitely disagree with the majority of what the Free State Project is doing.
Yeah.
And the representatives, it doesn't line up one-to-one, the representatives and the actual people of New Hampshire.
Yeah, exactly. And I think people just need to realize that what happens in Concord frequently is more important than what happens in DC for a lot of intents and purposes. That's really where a lot of the legislation is getting written that affects your life.
And I think that distinction is important too, because when people think about politics in Washington and politics in New Hampshire the same way, they probably think, oh, politicians are getting paid way too much. They're making $1 million off of corporate lobbyists or something like that. Vague, sort of getting paid too much rhetoric. Maybe in Washington, but here they're paid literally $100 plus gas money. Right?
Yeah.
$100 a year.
Yeah.
Which is nothing. It's literally probably, I assume, the bare minimum they were allowed to give them.
Yeah.
I assume they weren't allowed to give them zero, because otherwise why would it be $100 a year?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure exactly what the logic was behind $100 back when they wrote the Constitution, except that obviously $100 was a lot more money then. And I've been told, and I'm not exactly 100% sure about this, but I've been told that back in the day, like in the 1800s or whatever, when you got elected as a state rep or whatever, you would continue to get paid by your boss or your employer, and you would just take the time and go serve. And the idea was that your employer would just assume that it was for the greater good that they pay you, and that but obviously that's not what's happening now.
Yeah, I mean, I do understand the idea, especially in New Hampshire. We have what's called like a citizens legislature of 400 people. Personally, I'm a fan of the 400 people part.
Yeah.
I like that part. I'm not a fan of the not getting paid.
Yeah. Well, so it's kind of funny because, you'd only have to do a couple tweaks to pay the legislature like $500 a week, which I think would be enough that a lot of people could do it who can't do it now. And one easy way to do it, I mean, you need a constitutional amendment to change the $100, but we have a 50-cent per mile payment, which could be bumped up to $5 or even $50 per mile, and then you would just cap it at $500 per week. So there's some pretty easy ways, at least one pretty easy way to fix this. And I think that it's just imperative that people realize that it's not really democracy if the average working class person cannot participate.
I strongly agree, and I don't think I've told my audience yet, but I did run for state rep a couple of years ago. and I was personally affected by this.
Yeah.
I had a very hard time, well, for two reasons. One, I didn't relate a lot to any of the people I was talking to.
Yeah.
Because most of them were old retirees.
Yeah.
I went over some of their houses when talking about my campaign.
Yeah.
And they had like big house,
Yeah.
big yard, and the only person who was running who was in the same age bracket as me, even vaguely, was Kurt DeVetter was his name.
Okay.
And he was about 35 or something.
Yeah.
And he was a single stay-at-home dad. Again, nice house.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, okay. So everybody here but me is going to commit all of their time to this. And that was only made clear to me after I had started running.
Yeah.
That I was going to be the only person that any of them knew who had a job and was doing this.
Yeah, totally. No, that's it. And it's just really hard to, I think, in many ways, play the game in New Hampshire because the game is sort of rigged against young people, because even the Democrats that can afford to go up there are generally older, retired, and they're just less connected with our issues in terms of housing. A lot of them haven't bought a house in decades. They haven't rented maybe in potentially many decades.
Right.
They don't have a concept for what it's like for your rent to go from $1,300 to $1,700, or from $600 to $1,200, or to double, frequently overnight. So there's just a large group of people that are not being, represented.
Absolutely. And that was another part of the age gap. I remember when I was talking about housing, and people were surprised that I was making that a core issue.
What year was that?
So that was, 2020 probably?
Yeah.
I think it was 2020.
Yeah.
I have the cards here, but I don't think,
cool.
They don't have a year on them.
Yeah, smart.
I
can reuse them.
My little platform.
Yeah, if you don't put your the date on them, then you can reuse them. That's what I've been trying to do.
Yeah, which is I'm glad I can reuse them, because I'm probably going to run again in a couple of years from now when I'm in a better position financially.
Yeah. Does Goffstown usually go Dem or Republican?
It usually goes Republican, is my understanding, but I think it wasn't an overwhelming Republican.
Yeah.
I get the impression a lot of New Hampshire is independent voters, especially because of the way our voting system works here. A lot of people switch. I used to switch parties.
Yeah. How long have you lived in Goffstown? Did you grow up here?
Yeah, I grew up here. This is born and raised right here where we are, pretty much.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've been a resident for a while now, and when I ran and talked about housing, I did notice that a lot of the older people, the older residents there, that wasn't the top of their minds. The top of their minds were property taxes, which is also an important issue.
Yeah.
But the shift in positions hasn't been registered. You know what I mean? Because property taxes, that's a very important issue.
Yeah.
It's an issue that doesn't affect anybody who doesn't own any property, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
So your campaign surprised me in a couple of ways.
Oh, cool.
That got my attention.
Yeah.
Right? Because for the most part, when I look at the Democratic candidates, I see them kind of saying the same stuff.
Yeah.
So when I look at the Democratic candidates, I'm like, well, I guess I'm going to vote for a Democrat, but I don't know who, and I don't really care, because they all seem the same, right?
Yeah.
And when you started talking about paying the representatives, I thought that was different. Is anybody else talking about that? Is there support for that, do you think?
I wish they were all talking about it. It's just one of those things. I think we got to just keep talking about it and keep drilling it into the zeitgeist, because it's the only way people will sort of realize that it's an issue. And it's come up before. They've tried to do it. There's been bills to pay the legislature, and the problem has been, I think, a lack of marketing, and that they did not bring this to the people and say, hey, what we have here is a lack of democracy. And I think even the younger Republicans that I talk to that are in the legislature, they understand the need for them to get paid.
Right.
And especially the economic situation that we're in right now, where you frequently need two people working in a family, makes it very hard. There's a lot of people that aren't running again. The turnover is really high with the state reps, and I think it's really important that people start to realize that there's it's a systemic issue that's not going to go away, and it's not going to fix itself. We have to really put the pressure on them to fix it. And this is the thing that people need to understand. The reason that the legislature doesn't want to pay themselves is because then there will be more people that can run, and they will have more competition on the ballot, and they don't want that. They don't want to get primaried. A lot of them just want to have their power and not have to worry too much about running an election that they might actually have to try in. So
right, absolutely.
That's really crucial for people to realize the systemic issues.
I was, when I ran, I think at the same time there was a Republican candidate who ran, and she was a younger candidate. And I remember seeing attack ads, like Catherine Williams or something, attack ads being put out about her. I was like, this Gen Z lazy girl who's on her phone all the time, she wants to run? And it was interesting because it was a Democrat attack ad against a Republican candidate.
Yeah.
But it was using rhetoric that you would normally hear from the right wing.
Yeah.
These young people, they're so lazy.
That's funny. Do you know who made the ad?
I don't.
That's interesting.
I assume, just knowing from what I know nationally, I assume that it was probably somebody who wanted to see moderate Republicans beat extreme Republicans. Because that's what happens a lot.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you think it was, okay, that makes sense. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah.
I also was taken by surprise by you talking about state ownership of marijuana production.
Yeah, so I'll explain where I came to that conclusion because it definitely surprises people. But I own a restaurant that has a liquor license, and I initially, one of the things that I wanted to do was eliminate the liquor commission. Because as a restaurant owner, they have a lot of arbitrary power, and frankly, they enforce a lot of laws that are from the 1890s that have no business being enforced. And I thought, why can't we just sell liquor at the grocery store or buy liquor at the grocery store just like every other town or state? Sorry. And when I looked at the budget, I realized they bring in hundreds of millions of dollars over the years that they have contributed to the budget. So if we were to eliminate them, we'd have to increase some of their tax, be it income tax, sales tax, property tax, whatever.
Right.
And obviously that's not going to get me elected. And I also realized when I was thinking about that the Liquor Commission is fundamentally socialism. It's state-owned enterprise. They have a monopoly. And so from that position, you would think Democrats would be in favor of it. Now, the Democratic argument against it, I totally understand, which is the state of New Hampshire has been locking people up for decades for cannabis, and is it fair for them to then turn around and make the money off of it? And they think there should be an element of justice, like paid back, which I agree with. So in my plan would be to take some portion of the profits and give it to anyone, make payments to people who have served time for solely selling or distributing or possessing cannabis.
Right.
Obviously there's a lot of cases where someone is busted with cannabis, but they also have a couple other drugs with them. You know what I mean?
And then it's multiple.
Yeah, that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about if anyone was just arrested for distributing, growing, or selling cannabis, then they would be entitled, I think, to some kind of compensation for sure. So the way that I'm kind of looking at it now, and honestly this is an evolving idea as I meet more people and as bills churning around this. There's one that's right now going to go back to State House to get voted on. What I would like to see currently is basically convert all the... So the other reason that you got to think about this is the Republicans in the Senate has spelled out what their priorities are and what they want, which is they want a state-run model. And their biggest issue is, honestly, it's a little bit... it seems like not a big deal to maybe a lot of people, but to them it's a big deal, which is they don't want to see a bunch of ugly, quote-unquote, ugly, tacky pot shops in their towns.
Oh, yeah.
So they go to Maine and they see like 5 or 6. Yeah, but for them it is, and I think you just have to kind of take them at their word. All right, so that's your concern. And the other problem that is, if you look in Colorado that they're having right now, is so many pot shops opened when the states around Colorado did not have legalization. Now those have legalized, and the cannabis industry in Colorado is kind of imploding. So a bunch of shops are closing. It's going to be a thinning of the market. So I think New Hampshire's not going to have that problem because obviously it's sold all around us. But I think we have a potential to steal some of the market from the surrounding states in the same way that we steal liquor sales by selling it at the liquor store at a reduced price for Massachusetts. And I'm mainly talking about Massachusetts, and I'm mainly talking about people who are coming up every summer. They're going to stop at the liquor store. They're going to buy their booze to go to their lake house in Maine or Vermont or New Hampshire. And why not try to get them to sell them some cannabis as well? So what I would like to see happen is all the existing medical dispensaries would be converted to medical plus recreational, and then a certain number of the liquor stores, maybe not all of them, would have a location on their maybe on the property or that they would rent out to. It would have to be a whole separate agency to do it because of the federal laws. So it would have to be like the New Hampshire Cannabis Authority or something.
Okay.
And even if it was literally just on 95 and 93, you know what I mean? If you pull in, like if you think about the way 95 is set up.
Hooks at exit 11 there.
Yeah, you pull in, and you're going up north, you pull in, you know, you go to the liquor store, and then there's a shop next door that sells cannabis. Mainly the people coming in are going to be from out of state. So my thinking is,
smart.
How do we get money from people from out of state and then still like treat the people that have been working the medicinal shops for the last several years, you know, give them the benefit of becoming recreational. And they've been running as nonprofits too, which I only just recently learned. Okay. So let them actually make money, and then the crucial part is, and this is the part where I think they haven't talked about enough, is what we're going to do with the revenue, is put the tax revenue and the revenue from these New Hampshire Cannabis Authority into housing, into affordable housing through the New Hampshire Housing Authority. The other thing that I really am a big proponent of is home grow. You should be able to grow at least half a dozen plants or whatever at your own house, which the current legislation will not allow. And if you look at Maine, I mean, one of my friends, this is kind of funny, he lives in Maine, and I went to his house one time, and he's got this greenhouse in his backyard that's got clear plastic roofing, and he's got, I don't know, maybe a dozen cannabis plants in there. And I'm in his kitchen one day, and I said, aren't you ever worried about the neighbors or the neighbor, like high school kids or something, like stealing your weed or, you know, stealing your plants? And he goes, hey, look out the kitchen window. And I look out this back window, and I can see both of his neighbors' backyards, and I can see cannabis plants growing in both their plants, both their yards. And he says, dude, we don't worry about people stealing weed here because everyone's just growing it.
Yeah.
You know?
Plus it's legal to go to the store.
Yeah, so there's not this, and I think there's this idea that if people can grow it, that suddenly no one's going to want to buy it. That's just not true, because 99% of the people will not succeed at growing cannabis. Right. It's really hard. And you know, some people want to try, and they should be allowed to try. It's a naturally occurring plant. I do not think it will greatly, because I mean, still people are going to want to go and buy gummies, which they probably aren't going to be able to make at home. You know, there's other products that just would not be practical to try to make. You know what I mean?
I mean, I think we all know somebody who's made a pot brownie, and it was not the right recipe.
Yeah, either too much or too little. Yeah, and I mean that's the one thing that's great about having legal cannabis, is that you can know what you're purchasing, you can know what's in it, you can know the THC levels, you can know if it's going to make you sleepy or whatever. So I think that's a really important aspect of it, and I think that, so I'm hoping that when we win, if the current legislation, which is not going to go into effect till 2026, so hopefully we have time to fix that, and if it gets voted down completely, then we're going to start with a new, fresh bill and get cannabis legalized that way.
Yeah, I like a lot about your proposal. I was actually going to specifically ask you what your position was about home grow, but it sounds like you're in favor of it already.
Yeah, I mean, I was just kind of annoyed when I learned that the current law would not allow it, because it just seems like stupid.
It seems like a small potatoes, really.
Yeah, and it's just like, it comes from I think a position. I just hate the idea the government's going to control all these things, and like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I love about your proposal, obviously, is the revenue provision, and the comparison you make to socialism, I think, is apt. I think ownership, that's the benefit of state ownership.
Yeah.
Other things I like is, you know, the home grow. I'm kind of a localist, personally. I tend to prefer local small business a lot of the time, and I think home grow is great because that's self-sufficiency in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I even had this idea where you'd have like a couple tiers, and if you're going to go for, you know, big cannabis, you're selling at either, you know, a state run through like this New Hampshire Cannabis Authority, or, you know, potentially through a shop that already exists. Or I thought about having another one, a lower tier, where if you're going to only grow like 25 or maybe 50 plants, or however many pounds we'd calculate it out, then you could have what we'd call a farmer's market permit, where you could sell it at the local farmer's market, you could sell it to your friends and that sort of thing, and have a license for a small grower who's not really looking to do it as like a full-time job. It's sort of more of like let's say you're growing tomatoes and you're growing some other things, you want to throw cannabis into the mix. Yeah. You know, I think that would be cool.
That's great, because those things build community, especially.
Yeah.
I just went to one of those little things the other day up in Francisville.
Oh, cool.
Francistown,
yeah.
There we go.
To a farmer's market?
Yeah. And those are really nice. I'm a big fan of local small business. I was surprised when I ran at one point. I was talking about a tax on big corporations. That was one of the things I wanted, was to see more state and local governments tax corporations that want to come here, and I wanted to create a small business fund.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Small businesses.
Yeah.
And the person I was talking to was a Democrat, and I would have thought she would have been on the same page, but she was immediately like, well, no, those big businesses, we can't scare them off. That's where we get our tax revenue from.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, so I've read before people say big business and big government kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, no, I see what you mean there. There's an allyship there of like, we can't threaten the revenue.
Yeah. It's definitely tricky because you want businesses to come here, yes, and they employ people, so this is good, but you also don't want them sort of taking advantage of us. And I think there's also, you can look at some of the other states and how high their corporation tax is. I mean, I think it's Delaware or Connecticut has a really high, or no, it's New Jersey. New Jersey has a really high, it's like 11.5%.
Yeah.
And Walmart still does business there, you know what I mean? So I think that there's a way you can get that money without scaring them off. It's just a matter of finding the right point, which is in between. I mean, one thing that I would love to do is tax corporations like Walmart and then help use the money, like you were talking about, in a small business fund to help people create the main street businesses that sort of got destroyed by Walmart.
Yes.
It used to be that you'd have a local shoe shop and you'd have a local clothing store and you'd have a local toy store and a local auto parts and hardware and all the things, and that's what made up your downtown.
Just Walmart.
Yeah, so I wonder what we gained. How much did we gain when Walmart came in, decimated our downtowns, but now you can buy a big screen TV for $200.
Right.
From crap from China that's probably only gonna last a year or two.
I completely agree, and it's an empty Walmart. A lot of the times these days, it's an empty Walmart. So we came in, beat out all the local small businesses, and then left it sitting alone. Yeah,
totally. So I mean, I think trying to be creative around that issue is definitely worth it. Because the reality is corporations will continue to take advantage of us as hard as they can. It's in the nature of the capitalist publicly traded stock companies. They constantly have to be showing growth, and they will frequently get that growth through screwing us via the environment or through products that are inferior or through lower wages, cutting employees' benefits, all of these things. So I think we've reached a point where the corporations in New Hampshire and the United States writ large have gotten so much control over not only everything that we consume, but the entire political process with which we regulate the consumption, that we have to really push back against that, and there will be winners and losers for sure, and that's just an important aspect of it.
Right. Yeah, actually, I think it's funny that you use that exact same language, because when I ran, that was the exact same language I used. Was there's three constituencies that corporations ignore. I said environment, consumers, and workers.
Yeah.
And they're doing it for profits. And that's why when I ran, I talked about social enterprise.
Yeah.
Because that's another thing that those same tax dollars could go to. It could go to local small business, and that could be social enterprises that prioritize those things over profit. When Bernie Sanders ran, he actually had an interesting idea that I liked, where he wanted to raise the corporate tax rate, because it used to be really high. It used to be at like 90%.
Yeah.
And since I think it was just 1970s, it's declined to 0.
Yeah.
I think it's negative for Amazon, I've been told, right? So it's declined all the way down to 0. He wanted to raise that back up. I think he wanted to gradually get to like 60% or something.
Yeah.
And then he had what he called an exit tax, where he called for corporations that want to leave. He was like, no. He was like, we're not going to just say we're going to tax these big corporations, we're going to take care of ourselves, and they'll leave. He's like, you can't just leave.
Yeah.
We're a country, we should be able to assert some level of control here.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of Bernie. I definitely campaigned for him and advocated for him and his message in general. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been trying to connect with anyone in New Hampshire that was on the Bernie team, I think, to try and find me.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Try and help you out?
Well, I mean, I think we're pretty aligned, yeah, for sure.
At one point I did a volunteer for the Bernie Sanders people, and that was a good time, because you can just, people in the audience, especially young people, you can just show up random places where there are protests and just join them. I've gone to Trump protests. And I'm not a supporter, but I've gone and just been with the supporters and just wear normal clothes. Nobody knows if you're a Trump supporter. Now you could just wander around. So that's what I've done a lot of, and it brings a strong sense of community that I think many people are lacking. I found it easier to find community just by going to places and going to protests. I have watching the same TV shows as other people or whatever.
That's a good point.
And that's part of the reason I wanted to talk to you is because your ideas were not the normal Democratic Party platform. And you even said at one point, I think you said, who is my competition? In the Republican Party, it's a lobbyist and a career politician. The Democratic Party, it's a career politician and a lobbyist.
Yes. I know. I mean, I thought of that one day when I made that video, and I was like, man, this is it's funny, but it's definitely a little depressing, and that the options are are just so much the same, and it's really hard to tell younger people, when they say, so I'm in a restaurant, so I have a lot of 18, 20, 19, 20-year-olds working for me, and they'll say, oh, what's the difference, Republican Party, Democratic Party? And, I usually try to say, well, the Democratic Party, we at least passed Obamacare, which has been helpful to me throughout much of my, now even that's harder to defend because the rates have gotten so high, the coverage is so bad, people even with insurance are going bankrupt. So this is where it gets tougher and tougher, and then you look at, some of the other issues, and you see, especially the military spending, the Republicans and Democrats both get on board for the massive military budget, when we have clear and obvious problems at home that we're not paying for. So I think it's hard, it's hard to keep defending the Democrats, especially, they say back the blue no matter who, and then it's like, well, I want to vote for Joe Biden, but geez, he's getting real old. He's looking really...
getting really... I feel like it's always been rough, but I feel like the phrase, the vote for the lesser of two evils has been hurting when you hear it just a little bit more the past few years than it used to.
And yeah, exactly. And it definitely seems to be the kind of thing where you can't... how do you deal with that without, how do you sort of fight back against that, without worrying about, getting Trump elected?
All right. So that actually made a perfect segue because you were talking about how neither of the parties really feel good to vote for anymore, and how a lot of people want to vote for a third party or somebody from outside, but they can't. Right? It's going to be a spoiler effect, and so it's hard in our current system to do that. One of the things I advocate is it's actually from Pirate Politics. I'm looking because I got a book over here about pirate politics. There's a pirate party. They come from Iceland.
I've heard of that.
And they advocate something called liquid democracy. It's a system of e-democracy, so it would be in your phone, that helps to allow individuals to vote on issues that they want to, but then they can also delegate to other people so that they don't have to vote on every single issue. The idea is that it takes the binary of directly democratic governance and representative governments and it turns it into a gradient. So that you can, choose how much you want to participate.
That's interesting.
And I'm hoping the idea is that you'd be able to delegate your vote to people who align with your interests on certain issues.
I've heard about this, a little bit, my brother was telling me about it.
So like an interest group like the NAACP or the NRA or something, or well, debatably the NRA, if you want to, delegate your votes to them on certain issues so that you don't have to pay attention, you can. And it would allow for a lot more third-party organizations to have an actual presence. So some of the people I want to talk to on here is I want to talk to you because you're an outsider candidate, but I'm also going to be talking to libertarians. I found a group called the American Solidarity Party. They're like pro-life. They call themselves pro-family. They mean anti-gay marriage, but they're pro-life and they're also economically left-wing. So I want to talk to people from really all over the political spectrum and talk to them because I think all of those perspectives combined are what's missing, right?
That's a great idea.
We really only have the Democrats and the Republican perspectives.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, man. It was nice talking to you.
Hey,
Thanks for being my first guest.
No worries, man. Good luck. Good times.